Hey guys, Polsky here, back with another video. So today I want to talk about a stretch for the piriformis muscle. So the piriformis muscle is one of the deep six lateral rotators of the hip. So it sort of sits underneath that gluteus maximus muscle. It's one that can get quite tight and shortened if you're sitting for prolonged periods. So if you're doing a lot of sitting at a desk, a lot of driving, it really doesn't like being in that 90-90 hip flexion, knee flexion sort of position. So before we run through the actual stretch today, I want to talk a little bit about the anatomy. So as I mentioned, piriformis is a lateral rotator of the hip, but there's a little bit of there's something else to that, and we'll talk about that in a second. But to find the piriformis, let's talk about where it sits first. So it sits at the back here, underneath glute max. So let's say that's my left glute max. So to find piriformis, I'm going to first find my greater trochanter, which is the knobbly part on the end of my leg bone, my femur here. A good way to find it, sort of put your thumb there, try and find the knobble. It's like a big protruding bump at the very top of your leg bone, your femur, just below your hip. If you're having trouble finding it, sort of move your leg in and out until you really find this knobble will move back and forth, and it's the top of that bump that moves. It's like that's your greater trochanter. So piriformis joins on or attaches onto the very top of that greater trochanter. It then runs underneath glute max and goes to the front of the sacrum. So to find where it actually attaches in the front of the sacrum, sort of want to go find your tailbone, so that knobbly part right down the bottom of your spine. You follow your spine all the way along to your tailbone. So that go from there, and then you can also find another bony landmark. If you trace your hip bone down the back, there's going to be these little divots, and that's very close to your posterior superior iliac spine, PSIS. So you're kind of halfway between PSIS and the tip of your tailbone. It's roughly where the piriformis sits. So it sort of runs horizontally, a little bit diagonally towards that greater trochanter. So, and it's called piriformis because it's a little bit pear-shaped. So piriformis, pear-shaped, roughly speaking. So that's where it runs right underneath that glute max, so it's kind of hard to get to. You might not be able to feel it working directly. It sort of sits quite deep, and glute is a big muscle, so it's right under there. So you may not have come across this muscle before, but it is hugely important when we're talking about lateral/external rotation of the hip. So that's sort of the anatomy. So now let's talk about the function of piriformis. Now, piriformis is known primarily as a lateral rotator of the hip. So lateral rotation is when we want our legs sort of coming out this way. That would be external or lateral rotation of the hip. So my whole leg is rotating out. Internal rotation would be the opposite. It's like when my legs are facing in, so they're coming in. So when the hip is in extension, piriformis helps with lateral rotation. So on my left, it wants to go to the outside. That would be lateral rotation of the hip. But a funny thing happens when the hip goes into flexion. So when my hip goes into flexion, the piriformis, because of its anatomy, changes to be a bit of an internal rotator of the hip. And this is where it can be a little bit confusing. So the changeover happens roughly between 60 and 90 degrees, depending on your exact anatomy of your femur and where that GT sits, the greater trochanter, the angle of it, things like that. But roughly between 60 and 90 degrees, about 60 and 90 degrees of hip flexion, that piriformis is going to change from being an external rotator to being an internal rotator of the hip. And that's something you have to bear in mind when we're stretching. So that being said, we talked about the anatomy, the function of piriformis. Now let's talk about a stretch. So, you know, on this channel, I am a big fan of having stretches that we can hold for a prolonged period, and I believe in having stretches where the majority of the rest of our body can be as relaxed as possible. So for the Piriformis stretch today, I'm going to get out the yoga mat. I've got a yoga block, and we're going to be using the wall again. You know, I like to use gravity, I like to use the wall, I like to use props if I can. Anything to get the tension off the rest of the body when we do that stretch. So that being said, let's get into the stretch. So you definitely want one of these. You want a yoga block, or a stack of books will do at a pinch. This is 8 centimeters thick, or 2 and a bit inches, whatever that is in American terms, I don't know. But 8 centimeters, so, or a stack of books will do just fine. You're gonna pop this under your head, because it's really important whenever you're lying down to have your spine in a neutral position. So this is gonna pop under my head and keep my cervical spine in nice alignment, rather than putting too much stress on that cervical spine. So I've got my yoga block, I've got my mat, I've got my wall. So I'm going to go onto my back. I'm going to sort of shuffle a little bit towards the wall. I'm going to place my yoga block under my head so my spine's nice and supported. So before we set up, you want to make sure that, you know, you're probably, let's start 90-90, that 90 degrees of hip flexion and knee flexion away from the wall is a good place to start. And I'm placing the yoga block under my head so my head's nice and supported. So then what you want to do, let's say I want to stretch my left side piriformis. So I'm going to cross over and roughly put my left ankle just above my right knee. And then you want to see if you can feel a stretch along that piriformis. Really trying to feel it from that greater trochanter, the GT, all the way to that spot on the anterior surface of the sacrum, that spot right between your tailbone and your PSIS. Sort of, if you don't feel it, you might need to shuffle a bit closer to the wall. So I'm not really feeling it, so I'm going to move up a little bit, closer to the wall, and reposition my yoga block, and then I'm going to put my legs up on the wall again. So then I'm going to cross that left leg over, so my ankle is now on my right thing. Now I'm starting to feel the stretch through that piriformis. So what I've done with the hip inflection, I've externally rotated my left leg. And remember, when the hip is in flexion, piriformis wants to do internal rotation, so it wants to bring your legs in this way. When the hips are in flexion, external rotation is going to stretch your piriformis. So this is the basic position I want to be in. So I'm already feeling a little bit of a stretch through that piriformis. The good thing about this is I can chill out here for a long time and really let that piriformis relax. So I'm a big fan of being able to relax into stretches, and I have no tension anywhere else in my body. If you find that you want to increase the stretch, you can do two things. You can either move closer to the wall, or you can just push a little bit with your calf muscle. So with my right calf, I'm just going to go onto my toe and push a little bit, and I'll start getting a little bit more stretch to that piriformis. And this requires very minimal effort. But if you want to be completely relaxed, just shuffle closer to the wall and go in this position. So this is kind of my starting position. I'm feeling a stretch already through that piriformis. So now what I want to do is, remember, piriformis wants to do internal rotation in this position. So I want to kind of push my leg. If I want to do sort of an MET style stretch, so if we're talking about, you know, any of the PNF style stretching like MET, reciprocal inhibition, contract relax, any of those PNF styles, we're going to sort of want to do the opposite motion. So to do a reciprocal inhibition stretch for piriformis, I'm going to take my hands, I'm going to place them over my left knee, and then I'm going to push my knee. I'm pushing that way with my knee into my hands. I'm just going to do that for an in-breath of 6 to 8. And then I'm going to relax. And you should feel that that piriformis is stretching a bit, and that leg can go a little bit further down. So if you want to, then you can push with your toe a bit, and you'll find So this leg is coming towards the camera now. It's pushing this into more external rotation. So I'm getting even a bit more of a stretch. So I'm just going to hold that for my out breath, breathe out. I'm going to grab my knee again. I'm going to push my leg against my hands for one in breath, 6 to 8 seconds. I'm going to let it go. I'm going to push with my toe again, get a little bit more stretch. I'm going to start really feeling that piriformis stretch. Starting to feel really good actually. My piriformis on this left side gets a lot tighter than my right. Typically you'll find one side is tighter than the other. A lot of people have hip imbalances, very common. Okay, so I'll do one more set of that. So I'm going to push into my hands, pushing into my hands with my whole leg. I'm really trying to focus on doing it from my butt, from my piriformis. One in breath, 6 to 8 heartbeats. Let that go. Then I'm going to come up more onto my toe, and it's pushing the leg up, and it's pushing, so I'm going into more external rotation for my piriformis. Really starting to feel the stretch now. So now this last one, I'm just going to hold this, and I'm going to really breathe. And my mind now is in my butt, in my piriformis. And I'm really trying to imagine, visualize lengthening all the way from that knobble of the greater trochanter through to my sacrum. That's lengthening. If you need to, you can come up on the toe of that opposite leg a little bit more and get a little bit more of a stretch. And how long do we hold this? We hold this for as long as it takes for you to feel that muscle relax. But not only relax, but for it to give up the fight a little bit and go, oh, I'm actually getting kind of okay and happy in this position. I can hold this. I'm really starting to feel that open up now, but as long as it takes. You have really tight hips, this could take a long time. Could take 10 minutes, could take half an hour. However long it takes. But the more often you stretch, the quicker your muscles will release. So really starting to feel that piriformis release now. This is a great stretch. It's actually quite relaxing. You know, my whole spine feels quite nice in this position. Feeling like I can just chill and relax. Getting a nice stretch through that piriformis now. Okay, so I'm going to come out of this. I'm going to lower my foot, gently uncross my leg, shake it out a little bit. My hip feels a lot more open now. And then I'm going to come out of my stretch. So now if I play with my hip rotation, I can feel my hip is a lot freer. So I can do more internal rotation, because remember, piriformis wants to rotate out laterally, externally. I can actually get more internal rotation now because this piriformis is lengthened. So I'm improving my internal rotation when my hip is in extension. So there you have it, guys. That's a great stretch for the piriformis. There are a whole bunch of other stretches for piriformis out there, but this is the one that I find the most effective because you can really relax into it. You can breathe into it. Your body's not working hard. Your spine is in good alignment. You're using the wall. You can really chill out, breathe, and get that stubborn piriformis muscle to relax. And you just go with it, listen to your body and breathe. It takes as long as it takes. So there you have it, guys. That's the video for today. We'll be back real soon with another video with more content. And don't forget, listen to your body and breathe.